The moderator is Amanda Ravenhill, who's the executive director of the Buckminster Fuller Institute. Amanda?
So as you heard earlier, Buckminster Fuller said that you never change things by fighting the existing reality. You change things by building a new model that makes that existing model obsolete. We'll have a slide that says that, right? Yeah. And the slides will be up in a second. So the panelists today are all making the new model that will make this existing model obsolete. After meeting with them, I actually decided to change the name of this panel to be about systems thinking and regenerative cities. These are all systems thinkers that are, what Buckminster Fuller would call a comprehensivist. It's someone who's an expert generalist. And I would venture that a lot of the people in this room, too, are what we call at the Buckminster Fuller Institute wayward polymaths. Maybe your whole life you've been kind of told, why don't you just focus on one thing? But you like to kind of understand the whole system. And so welcome to the club. And you can rejoice in belonging. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So what systems thinkers do, or synthesizers do, is rather than kind of bluntly attack problems and then exist in this problem-solution kind of dichotomy, they instead try to dissolve instead of solve problems by looking at the whole system. So everyone here on this panel does a really good job of kind of zooming in and out and seeing the nested systems that they work within. And they move from being kind of reductionists to being comprehensivists. And they like to look at the core issues and the causal loops and draw diagrams around how it all works together. So in short, everyone here kind of knows everything is connected. So in 1970, Buckminster Fuller did a comprehensive analysis of global trends, inventory, human trends, inventory, and needs. And he discovered through that we actually had enough to go around, that we have the technological capability for everyone in the world to live at a higher standard of living than anyone could have imagined at the end of kind of the last turn of the century. And he said it would take about 50 years for all of our institutions to catch up to that paradigm shift. So we've gone from a you or me world to a you and me world. And so our educational institutions, our government, our religion, everything is kind of based on this old paradigm in which I can only succeed at the cost of your expense. Thank you. And so now we're shifting. We're almost 50 years later. He said it would take 50 years for everything to kind of crumble and be rebuilt on this new paradigm. So good news, we have a lot of good news today that in the next 3 years, by 2020, I think we'll see and have moved to what I call the generous economy. So moving from scarcity to generosity, there's all of these various paradigm shifts that are happening right now, and I think there's a lot to celebrate. And another thing to celebrate is my past project before Buckminster Fuller Institute was I co-founded Project Drawdown with Paul Hawken. We just released our book in April. And so it's 100 strategies to solve climate change and their projection over the next 30 years. And if you just look at cities alone, there's over $18 trillion business opportunity in the next 30 years, just looking at cities and buildings. And that'll reduce about 55 gigatons of carbon in that time. So I'll leave it to the panelists to kind of discuss some of the details here. They're each going to introduce themselves and speak for 5 minutes, and then we're going to hear from the audience and make this really participatory. But first, they're going to let us know what they're up to and how they're thinking in systems to solve climate change.
Mm-hmm. Let's go. Thank you. Let's go. So my name is Michael Grove. I'm a landscape architect and urban designer by training. I work at a firm called Sasaki, based in Boston and Shanghai. And we're really kind of systems thinkers. We consider ourselves global problem solvers. We work in the realm of resiliency and good urban design and planning. And so by nature, as a designer, I'm a very visual person, so I'm going to take you on a bit of a visual journey today about food, which is really my passion, how food impacts cities. A lot of people think of this urban-rural dichotomy as two very separate things. But over 20 years of practice, I've really learned how inextricably linked our cities and agriculture truly are. And the reality is, to address climate change, which is why we're all here today, we must first talk about food. Most of you know by 2050, our cities are growing, and about 14 of the world's 20 largest cities will be in Asia and Africa. We've heard a lot of focus on those places today. And growing cities mean growing appetites. There will be an estimated 9.7 billion people on Earth by 2020 as well. So to meet those needs, we need to increase our global food production by about 70% from our current levels. That's a huge amount. Now, in China, which is where I do a lot of my work, the problem is especially acute, with people in agriculture competing for the same land. Now, all of China's arable land lies in the eastern half of the country, which unfortunately corresponds to where about 93% of the country's population is also concentrated. This conflict resulted in a sobering amount of agricultural land lost to development, about 123,000 square kilometers between 1997 and 2008. Now, that's a big number, and again, I'm a visual thinker, and if you guys are spatial thinkers, you need a visual aid. That's just about equivalent to the size of the state of Iowa, lost to development, agricultural land lost to development. Of that farmland that remains, 20% of that is contaminated, according to China's own environmental protection ministry. So those numbers are big, and again, maybe not to be trusted because they're coming from China, but even though they are, that's pretty significant. And again, for you visual folks, that polluted land is about half the landmass of the state of California. Now, the average diet in China is also changing, with caloric intake rising faster than any other country in the world. Many of these calories are unfortunately coming from beef, where imports of beef have increased 19,000% over the past decade. And again, 660 gallons or so of water to produce a third-pound hamburger, that's a lot of natural resources. Our natural resources, because this is imported beef, that is resulting in kind of one of the least sustainable food sources in this growing country. Now, one example of where we're trying to shake things up a bit is a new district on the outskirts of Beijing. Songzhuan Agricultural City is about a 40 square kilometer development east of downtown and south of the airport. Songzhuan is seeking to shift the paradigm of how food in cities is sourced, reducing the need to transport it over long distances by offering a more integrated approach. Now, in China, this model works because, unlike in the US and many other Western economies, the size of farms owned by individuals rather than huge multinational corporations is much smaller, which allows for greater diversity of agricultural products in a more concentrated area. But agriculture, as we all know, goes far beyond food. At Songzhuan, an economy is developing around other symbiotic industries, such as biotech and textile production, that benefit on proximity to agricultural products. The strategy also allows existing residents to continue to earn their livelihoods through farming without being displaced, while the next generation is busy learning new skills that will provide them with higher-paying jobs. One truth, however, is that the way we continue to practice agriculture really hasn't evolved in the last 10,000 years. The corporate farm was really the first major disruption in millennia, though that's arguably a pretty detrimental one. And so I think it's time for another change. Now, in a globalized society, we find ourselves telling the rest of the world what they should eat rather than listening to what different cultures are telling us. For example, in Shanghai, the average diet consists of about 56% leafy greens. So instead of giving them Big Macs, let's give them what they're already eating. At the Sunchao Urban Farm, about 5 miles from downtown Shanghai, we're building indoor hydroponic systems that will supply much of the city's leafy greens locally, year-round, and cost-efficiently. These hydroponic systems increase production by about 40 to 100 times what a traditional soil-based farm could produce. And they're also living laboratories, allowing for urban residents to learn about how their food is grown. Especially important in cities like Shanghai, where urban youth are really disconnected from a nature-based kind of land ideal.
It's 97% more water efficient as well, right?
Absolutely, and LED technologies are improving exponentially as well, so it can be done with minimal energy requirements as well. So there's huge upsides here, and we're seeing it happen in cities not just in Shanghai, but in New York and around the world.
Spectacular.
Thank you. All right. We can play your video right away, or do you want to speak first?
Yeah, I'll just set it up real quick. So
Okay.
my name is Roger Sorkin, and I'm with the American Resilience Project. And we make documentary films that are designed to influence policy and inspire human behavior. You're about to see the trailer for the latest film, Tidewater, which looks at the national security implications of sea level rise, specifically in the Hampton Roads region of Virginia, where we have our highest concentration of military assets and we have our largest naval base. It's actually going to show this Friday here. So that gives you a little context. Let's look at the trailer, and then I'll come and discuss how we got to that.
It's not possible to wall off all that water. There's just too much.
That water is the economic lifeblood of this region. That's why the port is here. That's why the military is here.
It's our largest naval base in the world, and we're not going anywhere.
Flooding is impacting all the bases in Hampton Roads.
We have to have sailors that are ready to go to fight our nation's battles.
Pretty difficult to get the people onto the base if they're driving down roads that have standing water on them.
Flooding is happening on sunny days. Constant environmental challenges degrade readiness over time.
The commanding officer has to turn off the electrical power to the piers.
It cancels church, it cancels softball games.
And it stresses that up over time, especially in a military life. It's stressful enough.
The U.S. military, they see the problem. The naysayers are jeopardizing U.S. national security, and they are jeopardizing the U.S. economy.
The facts are that the water's coming up and the land's going down.
Water is the water, and it doesn't matter what your politics are, it still comes in my yard, in my basement.
It's a challenge to our mission. It's a challenge to our way of life.
What's our plan that will allow this region to continue to operate?
How can we be an exporter of good ideas to the rest of the world?
That's a real opportunity for this region.
We have the technology, we have the knowledge.
How do you make yourself part of the solution and not simply be a victim?
So I think there's so much that we could talk about. I mean, we're talking about systems here. I mean, we could spend so much time on just any one element of any system. I think that's the challenge for systems thinkers, is that we have to be able to maintain our big picture of how all of the elements of any given system work together. And we've heard a lot today about narratives and storytelling. And I'm biased because it's what I do for a living, but I'm sort of an evangelist for the power of story. Because when we do look at a system, or as they say in the Hampton Roads region, the whole of government approach to solving this problem, I think having a good narrative can provide the connective tissue between all of those elements of that system, so that it's easy to get sucked down into the weeds and spend 3 months looking at, what are we going to do about water management systems or drainage, without remembering that the drainage is also affected by infrastructure and human behavior, and even, I would say, and I love the term expert generalist. I might put that on my next business card. You think about human psychology and our perceptions and our biases and how those all factor into how we actually take action around things. And I come back to the messenger. I think for whatever reason, we're very biased with regards to who the messenger is. And it's easy to pick on Al Gore, but I guess my advice to an environmental filmmaker is if you're trying to reach a center-right audience, don't ask Al Gore to be in your film. And if you're trying to reach the Greenpeace audience, don't have a retired admiral in your film. So I think very carefully about who we choose to make the message. I think what's relevant about the Hampton Roads region for this particular discussion is that one fact you saw in the trailer is that there's 17 jurisdictions in this one region. There's almost 2 million people. Virginia is an interesting situation because they have what's called the Dillon Rule. I can't give you an exact definition of it, but basically those cities can't take action without state approval. There's no county level above them. So it makes it very hard for them to make executive decisions. And besides the fact that there are 16 other jurisdictions there, if one decides to build a seawall, great, except for the fact that they may not have thought that that water that they're now diverting is going to their neighbor who's now getting more water. So they really have a real need to work together on these things. And so it's sort of a system of systems here. So tying in that sort of connective tissue and coming back to the narrative, what is it that they all have in common? What's their shared purpose? What are their shared values? And I think that's what a story can really provide. It can really keep that in the forefront. And so what are the shared values? Well, they all want to have prosperous lives. They want to have strong national security, and I think we all want that. So that's sort of what I tried to weave through this film. And a little spoiler alert: it doesn't mention climate change. It's not, the term doesn't come up. Again, I come back to the notion that the purpose of this film, which is where we start, is trying to reach a center-right audience so that they can take action, they can put their solutions on the table, and not necessarily feel that they have to concede defeat to the liberals, which they don't want to do, but really give them a space to bring conservative values into the conversation. How are we on time? Okay.
We should wrap it up.
We should wrap it up. Well, I already took 2 minutes for the trailer, so I'll just leave it at that.
Great. So I'd love to hear a couple audience questions from these two. We'll just log them and we'll get back to them later. But just to kind of sink in what we just heard, we'd love to hear if anyone has any comments or questions.
Well, rumor has it we have $20 billion to build a wall. And it looks like that part of the world could use a wall, whereas the part where it's currently planned, I have yet to figure out why. Just an idea.
Well, $20 billion would help a lot in Hampton Roads, that's for sure. I know those city mayors would be drooling over that as a possibility.
Yeah. Any other questions or comments?
Over here?
No.
For Sasaki, how far into development are you guys in the urban farming?
Pretty far. We're working with some US-based agricultural experts who are helping us kind of work through some of the LED systems and all the stacks that we need for the development. Right now in the Shanghai project, we are in planning phases, kind of adjusting the master plan that's been done by the city to kind of rezone the uses to allow for more vertical farming. Right now they have kind of just kind of soil-based farming and greenhouse farming, but they don't have the zoning to allow it to go up right now. So they're working on that right now. So it's in a regulatory process, but they're expecting to break ground in early 2018.
Great. We'll just do one more question and then we'll move on to the other panelists.
You answered some of what I wanted to ask you, and I was curious to know the process by which you actually, decided to move into China and why, and also what the regulatory bodies are there and how difficult it is. I was with a young Chinese woman, American Chinese woman the other day who said there's a process there, and once you're not really sure where you're headed, but once you actually start moving, things move really fast. So I'm curious to know if you've compared notes on working here in the States compared.
Obviously very different kind of cultures and governmental systems. We started working in China in 1998, so we have about 20 years of experience working in the country, and have built a robust network of partnerships there, of governments and forward-thinking mayors that have kind of advanced through the government that have allowed us to kind of make inroads. On that particular project, though, we worked both with an existing operator of greenhouses on the site who are looking for something more. We're kind of a quasi-government-owned entity. We also worked with the local planning bureau in the district who are interested in rezoning, and the district mayor there. We We also have a partnership with the Association for Vertical Farming, which is a nonprofit based out of Germany, who have already begun kind of sourcing local suppliers in China. I think they've signed on 20 or 25 different partners throughout China that do all the things from the LED light systems to the grow racks to the solar technology required for energy production. So there's already this kind of network that we've been working with through experience over time.
Excellent. Thank you. All right, moving on to our next speakers, and then we'll come back to questions afterwards. Next up, we have John R. Seydel.
Yeah, hey, how's it going, everybody? Woo! That's good. I'm just looking at my watch right now, and I'm surprised that we have that much energy in here right now. But thank you so much for being here. You know, we've heard a lot of things that can make us feel a little bit negative, but we're here to end this panel and this day the right way and give hope, because there is a lot of hope to be had. I'm the Director of Sustainability of the City of Atlanta, led by the most sustainable mayor in history of Atlanta, Mayor Kasim Reed. He basically runs two cities, the City of Atlanta and the airport, which is the most busy. Now, I'm sure everybody's been to Atlanta just through the airport, even if you haven't spent a lot of time there. I recommend if anybody comes through, make sure you let me know. We can have a good time. We're going to probably agree on most things, too, which is nice.
The city's better.
Yeah. And so there's really three main things that I wanted to point out. One, talking about systems thinking, how do you make government and system and the political system cool? We're coming off of a year where, well, last night we had a really crushing defeat of John Ossoff, but we also had some of the lowest voting rates in history. How do you make it cool? And so coming into this position, using smart tech, like for our waste and recycling programs, we actually have this thing called Rubicon, where we actually have a dashboard, and instead of like ordering an Uber, it's like all your haulers are all going all around the city, and you get to track them, you get to see where they're going. And we used them halfway through because our rates are really, really bad. And we have a 90% diversion rate by 2020. And we're like, okay, our office is only in charge of outreach and education, but you know, we want to make sure that it's not our message that's actually making it wrong. And so we look at it, and we see that half of our haulers aren't making it to the frickin' recycling facility. And so, right, we might want to check this. Handle it internally. Of course, it could have been a really bad press if they got whiff of it before it got fixed. But now we've almost doubled our recycling total rates, and we just came off our best year and best month in 3 years. And so, using smart waste tech like this is a really cool way. People be like, yeah, government, yeah, trash. Like, who can get excited about those two things? Really, and so to come off of another reason why our mayor is so freaking badass, and you can quote that. We actually hired the first urban ag director in Atlanta history, not just Atlanta history, U.S. history. Woo. And so, it is worthy of clapping because in 2010, 56% of Atlanta was considered a food desert. Last year, down to 36% was considered a food desert. And our goal by 2020 is to actually reduce that down to just 25%, of course, with 100% access to fresh, nutritious food in mind. But we have 3 different projects that are really cool and out of the box. One of them, I can't mention who, but using transmission lines, underneath those transmission lines in food deserts to actually be able to produce fresh foods and vegetables for areas that only have access to Cheetos and cigarettes. So, you know, if you're going to get out of a poverty cycle and talk about equity, that's something that you really have to start off with. Right here you see our Atlanta Food Forest, which would be the largest by 0.1 acre in the nation. And it is a partnership of multiple different organizations, including the National U.S. Forestry Service and the National Parks. And so actually going together, this is a model to use parks as a forest and as a food-producing landscape, while also having the U.S. Forestry Service be able to take those people in the community and actually train them and employ them for the largest industry in Georgia, which is, hey, there you go. So it's talking about systems thinking. These are just like 2 different examples. And of course, I would be remiss if I didn't mention that a month ago, we passed a 100% renewable energy legislation. Bro. And that wasn't even the most exciting thing about that day, because there was 2 pieces of history that were broken in Atlanta that day. One, obviously, the 100% clean energy legislation. But two, we had 6.5 hours of public comment, where each person was limited to just 2 minutes. 6.5 hours. I don't know if you can do some quick math there, but that completely smashed records. Half the people that were presenting were young people underneath the age of 30. Not one was in opposition towards this resolution. And quite frankly, they didn't have a filter. And it was really fun to watch. And that was, if not more exciting than clean energy, was at least as exciting. Because if you're talking about systems, the only way we're going to fix our total political system is if we have engagement. And that starts not at the presidential level, which our media is really conscious of, but actually showing that you and 10 of your friends can actually make a real difference when you reach out to your city councilman or woman when they're making that decision. And so that's really what I want to end off. So I'm going to pass the mic to you.
Thank you.
I'm David Orr. I'm going to try to talk a little more slowly, but I've got to cover a few things. I'm from Oberlin College in Ohio. It was a college founded in 1832, first college to accept African Americans and women and graduate them. So our DNA is very much in line with our day. We are, as a town, about 85 miles on a straight line from Detroit, and to the east, they're about 35 miles from Cleveland. We're Rust Belt. Poverty level of about 20%. We're about a city of roughly 9,200 people, plus a bunch of students. When the new president came in 10 years ago, that I worked for as counselor to that president, we decided to use the city as a laboratory for sustainable thinking, for systems thinking. I began to think about what we call full spectrum sustainability, and we tend to silo issues. And so the goal was to put these together comprehensively, so what you did in economic development played out in education and played out in public policy and other areas. So it's a lot easier to say that than to be called a comprehensiveness, which I never thought of myself in that term, but it's a great word. But to do systems thinking, and that again is the most radical word in the English language. It means pulling things together. And on the other side, it's breaking them apart. So long story short, we're one of the C40 cities. We're the smallest, we're not even a good sized block or a tenement building in Atlanta, but we're one of the C40 cities. We've eliminated about 90% of our carbon emissions. We have done about $106 to $110 million of redevelopment in a small downtown. Most of that is private investment. And then the third thing I want to say is this. The word city and the word civic and civil and civilization are all linked. And so what we know of civilization came from cities. And so the conversation we're now starting, along with John Powers and a few others of you in the room, is a conversation about the future of American democracy. And it'll kick off in Oberlin, Ohio, November 15 to 17. I'm not concerned about Donald Trump. I am concerned about how we got to 2016. And Donald Trump, as you've heard from other people, is, I think, not so much a problem as he is a symptom of a problem that goes way back. Perhaps to the Southern strategy of Richard Nixon, or maybe all the way back to our constitutional DNA, but there are things we have to solve. The other thing we're concerned about in these events is what happens after Donald Trump goes. And he will go at some point. It's like watching a Shakespearean tragedy. We're in Act 1, but Act 3 will come. And we don't know how many bodies are going to be on the stage, whether the theater itself is going to be in flames or not. But so the question then for these 4 gatherings, national gatherings, is what do we do to pick up the pieces and restore this? Not the way we were in 2015, but rather improving what we have to deal with the challenges that all of us have heard about for the past 3 days. Climate change, equity, distribution, terrorism, and so forth. So the first meeting will be held in Oberlin, November 15 to 17. The second will likely occur here in Denver with John Powers, an ally in this process. The third will be in Los Angeles at the Schwarzenegger Center. He's one of our partners in this enterprise. And the last will be in Atlanta. John will be our featured speaker.
Come on down, everybody's welcome.
But the goal here is to start a conversation. And the question for me at a college that was the first to accept African Americans and women, and we're the college or the town that is said to have started the Civil War. Long story, but we'll just leave it there. But what do we have to say to the world now? What's our message to the world in the middle of the 21st century going forward? What can we say about the future of democracy? A government of the people, by the people, and for the people. And it is in serious trouble, as all of us know. What do we do about this? And it's got to be constructive, it's got to be positive, and it's got to bring everybody along. I'm from the Rust Belt, and things look very different in the Rust Belt than they do from Silicon Valley or from a lot of parts of the East Coast. So that's Youngstown, Ohio, that's Detroit, that's Cleveland, Ohio, that's Toledo, places that have been left behind and disinvested. They have got to be part of this democracy. So that's what we're doing. And the challenge, I think, for all colleges and universities, and I'll say one last thing. I hang my hat in an educational institution. Fake news is a direct assault on the idea of education. And the idea of education, a public that is literate and smart, and Thomas Jefferson said this a long time ago, that is the very basis of democracy. So this is a body blow, this is a direct threat to democracy, to education, to our future in every possible way. So that's what we're doing. That's my story, and I'm sticking to it.
Thank you. So we'll do another round of questions, and then we're going to do a fun audience participation exercise.
Thank you, David, and thank you, John. Sandra Kwok, 10 Power. I used to live in Atlanta, Georgia, and I actually got spit on when asking people if they would like a free progressive voter guide when Kerry was running against Bush. And I know how hard it is doing work on the front lines in the South and in red states. And I'm curious, especially at this moment in political history, what some hashtag keywords are that bind us all as Americans. And Roger, you can probably weigh on this too. And also in your work, how you've overcome a lot of the barriers that we're facing right now.
Absolutely. So I assume you're talking, one, I'm going to have to think on the hashtag. Let me think of that real quick. I'll just say with the urban ag, with agriculture being the largest industry in Georgia, and Atlanta being that one little blue dot in the middle of a sea of red, there's a lot of things that we disagree on. One thing that we really do agree on is when we start talking about agriculture and about giving people an opportunity at life, at a better life through ag. And farmers, people, when you get 45 minutes outside of Atlanta, they get it. They get it. And so it's being able to focus on not the differences that you have, but the things that you share. Those are really the focuses and how you actually introduce them to sustainability and resilience and equity. But you know, I love the hashtag #LoveArmy. I also love the hashtag AREDAY. So if anybody's tweeting or you know, doing any type of social media, make sure you use that from now on, because they're not doing the year anymore. It's just hashtag AREDAY every year.
Hashtag Food Unites.
So yeah, I mean, I'm glad you raised that. And you know, I think when you talk about you know, not focusing on what the differences are, I think we need to acknowledge the differences and not be afraid of them. And you know, one thing I've been thinking a lot lately is, you know, there's this taboo about talking politics with your family at Thanksgiving, right? Like you don't want to upset Uncle Frank because, you know, if you mention Obama, he's going to freak out, and you don't want to upset him. I think that's where we need to now be brave enough to talk to Uncle Frank at Thanksgiving. Of course, you don't want to get your whole family mad at you for ruining Thanksgiving dinner, but the challenge is to find a way to talk about it, and that goes to values, and that goes to, you know, because obviously you're both sitting around that table, you obviously share some values together. You obviously have a family. You're both there because you care about your families. So I think, you know, that's one thing we try to do with our work is not preach to the choir. You know, we really are looking for ways to communicate with conservatives, really find the best ideas, and give them a safe space to come to the table, because we do a lot of private screenings with Republicans. We go to a lot of state legislatures. We don't have too many public ones, and we had a screening with Senator Tim Kaine the other night on Capitol Hill. We worked really hard to get a Republican to come to the room, and you know, we got all this, the congressman's busy, he's got another event, thanks for the invite, he supports you. I mean, that's all we got. But I think we have to find ways to be able to talk about it. And you know, our next project is actually looking at the grid, the future of the grid, with a focus on the South, looking at Georgia and Alabama, and what is the Army? You said the Army, it's such a contrast, because they're putting in solar installations at their bases in the South, and you talk about food desert, it's like solar desert, because you know, the solar oasis, it's the only place you're going to find solar in Alabama is on the Army base. So I think that's that you got to find the way into the conversation. It's national security. I mean, who's against saving lives and money, right? I mean, that's what the Army is doing solar for. They're not doing it for saving the planet, so to speak. So you just got to meet people where they are. And as for hashtags, I have to confess, my mind is not wired for social media. For some reason, I may just be too old. So my assistant's like the hashtag genius. So I'm not gonna.
Meet people where they are.
There you go. Thank you. Hashtag meet people where they are. You get the credit for that.
Let's say one thing about that. One of the concerns that I've got in thinking about the future of American democracy is you can't have a democracy with dumb people, period. That takes you real quickly to education. We graduate an awful lot of kids who have been through days where 9 hours on average they're in front of a screen. You can't have a democracy if that's how they spend their days. And so civic education is really critically important. And we've got to restore that. I mean, among our wish list at the end of the phase 3 of our project, we're going to have a series of very practical objectives, one of which is to get civic education back on the agenda in public schools. It was cut, but football teams weren't. Kids have got to come out knowing how we conduct the public business publicly, fairly, and decently. And that means they have to understand the Constitution and politics. So that's part of Uncle Frank. When you talk to Uncle Frank, get him to read.
A quick anecdote to add on to that. My daughter in 5th grade, after the election, we got a note from the principal saying, we're not going to talk about the election because it was just too controversial and caused too much anguish for people. And I feel like that was one of the most appalling things and abdications of responsibility that a school principal, I mean, that's sort of like the Uncle Frank thing. I mean, you're going to bury your head in the sand. No, that's when you have to start having the conversation.
Yeah. You bet.
Hi, everyone. I get so excited about this, and thank you so much for your work. And I just want to say that Buckminster Fuller had an opportunity to teach us for 6 years, and our business programs are based on that. And if Wang Ming had been here, I know that Chip and Sally would have had him on this panel. And I just want to share with you that there is a city that's 1 hour and 10 minutes away from Beijing on the fast train that is called Deshore, where 100%, actually about 98% of the people use solar for heating their water and all the street lights. And we'd like to invite you all to come to the Solar Valley, and we have a little booth right by the entrance where we all have lunch. And one of the things that I know that Wang Ming would have wanted to say that he is the one that for over 25 years has been fighting all those people that we hear that go outside, that disassemble things and then take them to Brazil. And he has been fighting and going for the beauty of all the work that you are all doing, and that he wants to share all the technology and information. You can go there anytime. David, thank you for always inviting us to you, and he will share with you all the information, all the learning experiences that Bucky taught us. Human beings don't make mistakes. They only have learning experiences, and we want to share that with all of you and know that there's a whole city already functioning with beautiful Chinese people that are very committed to the greening of the world. And thank you for everything that you do. And Wang Ming wanted me to say to all of you in this room, thank you for your love, for your commitment, and aloha. Thank you.
We love Juan.
Great, so we have about 6 minutes left, and I want to do a little experiment. So as we've learned, climate change is the great convener. As we saw in Paris, it was the largest group of heads of state ever to get together in the history of humanity. And we're all convened here in this room. And I would love for us to just take 4 minutes right now, meet someone in this room who you haven't met before, who you're going to become their champion, and they're going to become yours. You're going to share with them what you are offering and what you need, and you're going to help one another. Because that's what climate change is calling on us to do, is realize that we're all one community, and it's about Ubuntu, as they say in Southern Africa. I am because we are. So once I stop talking, you're going to look around and find someone you haven't met before, and then I'm going to call after 2 minutes. You're going to switch, and then we'll come back and have some closing thoughts. If you can't find anyone, just put up your little ostrich hand. All right, so just some final couple, three to 5 words from each of the panelists. We'll start with you, Michael.
Feed your neighbor. Food brings us together. So if you don't know somebody, reach out. Agriculture and food is the great unifier.
Feed your neighbor.
I would say have the hard conversation, but do your homework first. Don't lead with the liberal talking point, but meet people where they are.
President Trump has pulled us out of the Paris Agreement. For those who didn't know, we can't officially be pulled out of the Paris Agreement until November 7th of next election year for our next president. So remember that. And cities, 75% of GDP comes from cities. 70% of job growth comes from cities. 40% of greenhouse gas emissions come from cities. And we have 310 cities amongst 2,000 other universities, states, and businesses, and universities that have all agreed with us saying that hashtag, we are still in, and we are upholding and honoring the goals of the Paris Agreement. And we're going to hold down the fort until November 7th when everybody and everybody's children and everybody's nieces and nephews goes and votes and make sure that we actually stay in and not pull out.
Vote.
My last word is simply democracy is not a spectator sport. We're all citizens, and you can be a good citizen or bad citizen, but we're one way or another, we're in this together. And we're citizens across all the things that divide us, of ethnicity and race and so forth, and also time. So my last thought, very simply, that if you think of this, the human enterprise, as an intergenerational democracy, there's a whole lot more of them than there are of us. And so what we do as citizens of the planet and citizens of this enterprise called humankind and civilization is critically important. It isn't a spectator sport. Get involved in your local communities. And this is just repeating what Dan said, previous speaker. Vote, run for office, write op-eds, talk to people, and include Uncle Frank in this. Talk to Uncle Frank.
And I'll just end by saying that we need to move away from the shame and blame game that we've been playing as the environmental movement and into this understanding that we're not a poison on this, our species is not a poison on this planet. We can be a beneficial species.
Yeah.
All right. And now we have a special.
Yes,
next up, we're all going to stay on stage.
We have a special little treat for one of you in particular. And yes, it is, in fact, the AREDAY first annual Millennial Award. And it's going to go to the Millennial on the panel.
What?
So.
Oh, my God.
So Sally and I want to present this to John R. Seydel for his unfailing, let's get up here. Sorry to get in your way, David. Leadership for this incredible job that you're doing in Atlanta, and the fact that all the cities in the United States are now looking towards Atlanta for their incredible opportunities to follow your lead and have 100% renewable energy in their cities as well. So John R., we wanted to award you this
Thank you
AREDAY
so much.
Globe.
I'm telling you, this is a complete surprise. I had no clue, but let me just speak from the heart for 30 seconds, like I haven't been speaking from the heart for the past 45. But 7 years ago now, before I saw Inconvenient Truth, but it didn't really give me any solutions. And so I was a concerned kid wondering, what the hell am I going to do about climate action? And then there was this thing called renewable energy that was in 10 seconds of the movie. And Chip and Sally invited me and they said, please come to American Renewable Energy Day, and we'll give you a platform to be a young leader for your generation. And since that day, if you remember, sitting in the front every time taking notes, and if anybody wants to see them from 6-7 years ago, it's like a whole set of encyclopedias. This is what really fueled my passion up for energy, and how I was going to plug into sustainability and leave my mark. And so I am so loyal and so thankful to be here and to have been given that opportunity. So thank you so much. Love you. Oh, yeah, go ahead. Love you, and I love everybody here. We're only going to do it together.
So what I want to say is I've known John R. now for, I think, 7-8 years, and I've watched him really grow into himself and into his leadership and into his emotional intelligence and his intellectual intelligence. And this guy right here, you watch. This is a president in the making.
She said it. Everybody should run for office, especially the young people. Represent your morals. That's the only way you change things.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
Photo op. Let's get this award out there.